that got the LDCs a bit upset. But they only protested after the decision was made. And they went back to the SG and told him to reinstate the other USG posts. They didn't succeed. I mean, surely the discussions must have been going on the 38th floor for some time about wanting to cut down and to combine the two posts into one. But the intelligence didn't come out, didn't come through to us, the small states, and to the LDCs. If only they had made some effort then to try to obtain the information and then follow up to make sure that your interests are secured. In other words, the SG was going to cut back on a USG post. Maybe he should have his way on that, but we should extract something in return. I mean, for example, maybe a post in another area, or maybe more resources for a particular program that is of great interest to the LDCs. But no attempt was made, an attempt was made only after the fact. And that's the kind of, I think, capacity that we need to build as small states and as LDCs.
Well, as you mentioned Security Council reform, I just wonder, what is the position of small island states on Security Council reform at this stage? And how do you plan to influence that?
This is one issue, I think, where the small states have a lot of clout, potential clout, because every vote counts. Okay, this is one issue where you can actually use your vote to get something for yourself. Instead of being pushed around to vote according to what the big boys want, you tell the big boys, look, you give me something A, B, or C, I will vote with you on a particular issue, especially if that outcome is not going to be unfavorable to you. So you decide. And I think most of the small states have actually gone along supporting, I think, a number of them are supporting the G4, those countries aspiring for a permanent seat, without really pushing hard for anything in return. I mean, maybe I don't know enough of what's going on behind the scenes between the small states and the potential permanent members or aspirants to a permanent seat, but I don't see that happening at the UN. I don't see any real improvement for them at the UN, but they actually seem to be sort of signing on. In fact, they're taking the lead in pushing the G4 position sometimes, without really thinking through what that really means for them nationally. And I think small states have to sit down on Security Council reform and ask themselves, what is it that they actually want to achieve out of this reform exercise? Is it just to allow a few more countries to become permanent members? Or is it to allow for a few more countries to get what they call these recurring seats, I mean intermediate seats? I mean, is that what they want? The whole discussion on Security Council reform has been driven by the views and the interests of the middle powers and the larger powers. And small states have just been dragged along into this exercise. We should be insisting, for instance, on having more non-permanent seats, just two-year non-permanent seats, so that more small states can serve in the council. But again, if you want to get those seats, make sure you do a good job when you get on the council. There's no point asking for a seat, and then once you're on the council, you become a cipher sitting there for 2 years saying nothing, allowing the big boys to push you around. That's not acceptable. Or you should be pushing for improvement in the working methods of the council. Right now, the council is completely untransparent. What they do, you don't know. I mean, for example, the rules of procedure of the council are still provisional. 60 years, 65 years after the UN has been formed, the rules of procedure of the Security Council remain provisional, which means they can change it as and when they want to. And so we need to push for greater transparency, get a greater role for small states to participate in some of the work of the Security Council, especially when it comes to peacekeeping operations, when it comes to issues of interest to them. And most of these are done outside, meaning outside the public view, and I think small states don't know what's happening in the council. I think we should be pushing for our own interests rather than just following the line set for us by the bigger boys.
Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, just to indicate or to respond actually to the first part of the question regarding the capacity concerns, the inability of covering so many different issues at the same time. The two important ones that are now ongoing, financial and economic crisis, and the response to preparations for the conference in the middle of this month, the third week in this month, as well as Security Council reform. I'll go back to our approach we have within CARICOM of a sharing approach, because both issues right now are quite important for our delegations. So what we have done within the caucus is to ensure that we have 2 or 3 of our countries representing CARICOM in the continuing discussions. So for the Security Council reform, and I don't know if actually Vanu was able to actually observe this, but we have 3 members of our caucus who actually have the responsibility of being there, even if they're supplemented by others of us, when it is possible. So we're always there, and we prepare our speaking notes or talking points, and they would move forward. Those 3 countries or a representative from one of them, one of the 3, within the Security Council negotiations. The same is true for the financial crisis, although with a little variation. In the negotiations, you will find that the chair of the G77 at the level of negotiations would tend to be negotiating on behalf of the members of G77. What is important for us is to ensure that our representation from CARICOM countries, that we are there within G77 as we are preparing the bullet points for the negotiations. And here again, we have a sort of a subcommittee of 3 from CARICOM to ensure that we are there within G77 to convey the particular concerns of CARICOM, and hopefully the chair, if we get the support of G77, can then carry them forward to the negotiations with the partners. So basically, this is how we have been trying to respond to this capacity issue in New York.
We just have a few minutes, but there were 2 questions at the back. Can I just take those 2 questions? And then, okay.
Thank you again for the presentations and for the information and insight. I don't wish to step on anyone's toes, but I'm wondering if there seems to be, given the fact reference has been made to the fact that resources are limited and that small island states are not getting the resources that probably sometimes are promised or just not available. I'm wondering whether or not there seems to be a question of ineffective diplomacy by small island developing states because of the fact, well, I know in the Caribbean, diplomats are political appointees, and whether or not it should be based on a system, recruiting diplomats should be based on a system of merit, experience, skill, qualifications, and so on. And whether or not we could effectively lobby by having, these types of diplomats, not taking away from your experience and your work, but, probably changing the system a bit. In addition to which, I wanted to find out as well, it seems as though small island states have always put themselves in this situation where they become dependent, and they always, going with their hands begging, going with their hands out. And I'm wondering what we ourselves can do as citizens or as diplomats and so on. What resources we can tap into and what we can actually do for ourselves as opposed to always going cap in hand.
Thank you very much. Can I get the last question at the same time?
Thank you. SIDS, ACP, and landlocked states, et cetera, represent a fairly new trend in caucusing and cooperation that crosses the traditional regional groupings within the United Nations system. However, structural leadership and essentially power within the UN system are still determined by those regional groupings.
I don't want to appear to be, immediately defensive, but what I can say is that from where I sit, I don't see that happening in all countries, in all situations. In fact, you do have in some of the countries of the Caribbean a career system of foreign service officers who actually are assigned pretty much on rotation, from location to location. Yes, there is from time to time some political appointees, but for, I would say quite a few, 3, 4, 5, but quite a few of the members of CARICOM, they do have that actual system in place. So you do find a number of very, experienced, capable foreign service officers who are in the location to conduct the diplomacy for the particular country. Yes, there may be others who have not yet reached that stage of, I don't want to say maturity, but it may be a question of a resource constraint, a human resource constraint, where they have that many people. And I would only say that this is where there will be a need, for further, training to enable those individual countries, I'm not naming them, but those individual countries to move up to the higher level. So yes, some concern, but I don't think there's a broad brush of having it region-wide. In terms of the dependency syndrome, I would say on that point, it really becomes an issue of leadership